What's up, you guys? Welcome back
to Barber Academy.
And if you're new to this channel is dedicated to helping barbers grow, learn in the industry. I got over 300 videos and growing, and it's a huge database. So if that's something that interests you, you might want to consider subscribing. Today's video is all about skin lines, skin line positioning. Skin line positioning can be really critical, so we're gonna break down all the factors, and I'm gonna help you avoid some of the common pitfalls that are gonna make you struggle during your fade, so you definitely wanna stick around all the way to the end. So, I hear all these questions like, do a Mohawk fade, do a burst fade, do a taper, and you know, it's actually kind of similar. The funny thing is the skin line positioning does change and it is important, but at the same time, one of the things that doesn't really change that much is the fade itself. So removing the lines, all that kind of stuff, we're gonna cover that in phase 4 of the blending. So if you guys wanna check that video out, I'm gonna address all the questions I've received over the years of teaching. And you're gonna be able to confidently establish your guideline where it needs to be. But before we get into the guidelines and before we get into the skin lines, one of the first things that I wanna cover is reference points. This is a universal language so that we all know what we're talking about and we all know our way around the head. Got my mannequin right here, and we're gonna talk about that right now. One of the first and most common reference points that we need to know is the apex. We can find the apex by simply taking a comb, tipping it back and forth on the top of the head, and then turning it 90 degrees and tipping it back and forth across the head. That's going to help you identify the highest point of the head. This is going to be useful when it comes to longer hair, parting, cutting the top. So the next one is the parietal ridge. This one's particularly important for what we're talking about today. To find the parietal ridge, we'll simply place a comb flat alongside the head, and right where it leaves the scalp, right on the curvature line, that's actually going to be the parietal ridge. And I want you to understand that the parietal ridge travels all the way around the head. Another common reference point, it's called the four corners. If I cross two combs on top of the apex, basically what you have is you have the bang area and then you have the crown. So that separates the bangs and the crown. The crown is this area of the head. Now the crown is a danger area. This is an area where you can have a lot of issues when you're haircutting, and we're gonna talk more about that later and why you might wanna consider a drop fade for certain customers. Next reference point, back of the head. There's a little bone that protrudes out the back of the head. It's called the occipital bone. If I drew a line straight across from the occipital bone, the area below it is the nape. There is a few more reference points, but they're not really relevant to this video. So now that we know our way around the head, let's actually get into some of the easier skin lines, and then we'll go to the more advanced ones in a few minutes. One of the first things that we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about the easy 3, all right? We got our high, we got our mid, and we got our low. So basically, what we're going to do for the high fade, let's start with that one because it's like the easiest one to find. Remember we talked about the parietal ridge, just putting the comb flat alongside the head. As soon as it leaves the scalp, you're gonna be able to see right where that parietal ridge is. So all high fades, most high fades, are going to be either on, possibly above, or maybe slightly below, depending on what your client requests. Some clients are going to want the fade super high, and there's nothing you could do about it because that's just what they want. I would recommend some clients that you just tell them like, hey, if you give me a little bit more room, I can stretch the blend and I can give you a better haircut. But sometimes that's not going to be an option. So we know where to put the high fade. Now, the other thing is we actually want to make sure that that line is straight all the way around the head. No dropping in the back, nothing like that. That's going to be your most basic high fade. So mid fade, probably the most common fade of all time. I love me some mid fades, I really do, because it gives you time to stretch that blend, and you can compress the fade if you want, or you can stretch the blend if you want. It just gives you more flexibility. So for the mid fade, it's pretty simple. We'll take it from the top of the C cup, and we're just going to keep it even all the way around the head with no dropping. And of course, we can add a drop to any of these, and we're gonna talk about that in just a second. So now that we've executed our mid fade line, we know where that is, we can do it. And you know, obviously if you look at your client's growth patterns, you wanna analyze where you actually might wanna put it. This is just a general guideline. So the next one is the low fade. The low fade could take place right on the top of the ear, and it also can go around perfectly straight in the back without dropping. We could actually get lower than a lizard, but that's what we're gonna talk about. So the next fade line that you're gonna see that's very common is the drop fade. So you can actually take this line from the low fade and begin dropping it in the back. So basically what it's going to look like, and you can do this with any of them, from the mid fade to the high fade, we are going to drop that fade and come across in the back. Now, this is one of the pitfalls that I wanted to warn you about. When you put your skin line in, you don't want to put it directly on any of the issues in the back. If you have a client who's got some rolls in the back or has a big bone sticking out, you want to make sure that you're fading either above it or below it, but do your best not to put the line directly on it because it's going to be difficult to fade it out. I know there's going to be times where this isn't possible, but you try to do your best to set yourself up for success. So try to avoid those type of areas. So we can drop any one of these just a little bit in the back based on what makes the most sense for the client. And how we talked about the crown, well, the crown is an issue area. This is an area where a lot of people have growth patterns, a lot of people have issues, and a lot of times barbers are going to drop down the fade a little bit to create a little distance between this and the crown. And that way we can get our blend done properly before we start getting into the beef up here with the crown. So now let's get on to some of the more advanced stuff, all right? So I would say the more advanced stuff and stuff that you'll start to learn when you grow in this industry, one of the things is going to be curving your guidelines. So I actually put like a little curve on this. I know it's not that good, but I'm just going to explain to you guys this. If I curve this guideline and I give it a nice belly and then I drop it down in the back, what's basically gonna happen is I've preserved a lot of my edge. I've preserved the areas that I actually want the blend to blow out into, and it could really leave you with some nice results. So this could actually help you frame the front of his face a little bit better, and it can cause the blend to look a lot sharper coming up, because if I didn't curve that guideline down, then that would mean I'd be removing a significant portion of his edge. So that's definitely a little bit more advanced, and that could really make your haircuts pop. There's also something to be said about preserving the edge up. A lot of times when people do a skin fade, you guys can actually watch this video where I leave the bulk and I showed you why, put it right here. But basically, we want to preserve some area to edge up into, and possibly your client might have a beard, so that might be another reason why you would leave that area alone and actually begin your line slightly behind the hairline. So let's talk about the Mohawk Fade. Now, the Mohawk Fade doesn't really change a whole lot more than a drop fade. The only real difference is instead of it traveling across the back, it's just going to end here. Now, Mohawk fades are totally artistic, totally fun, totally up to you how you want to do them. So you can decide exactly how high you want to do it, how aggressive you want to make it, and if you want to have it come to a point or if you want to have it sort of come to a square in the back, that's totally up to you too. So typically when I do a Mohawk fade, try to make it the same on both sides, and I do my best to decide how I'm going to do the back, or potentially your burst fade. And the only real difference between a Mohawk and a burst fade is instead of taking it all the way back here, your guideline's actually going to come in towards the ear, so the only area that's skin is that area just above the ear. It's really important that you take your time and make your skin lines accurate, because they're gonna be the foundation of everything else that we're trying to do. All right, last but not least, the taper. This term is thrown around a lot. They say it in a lot of different ways, and I really wouldn't say it's a totally universal term, because the taper can actually mean quite a few things. Let's check it out on Google. Let's see what they say. Okay, according to Google, it means to make or become gradually smaller towards one end, leaves the taper on a point, grows less and less, the rein tapered off. So that's what Google says about it, but that's not helping it. So let's talk about that slang, that barber lingo, that Cali, that New York, that Chicago. What we're talking about when it comes to tapers is a few things. One thing it might mean is just blowing out the line in the back, which means that instead of squaring off the back or instead of rounding off the back, we have no line and we blend it into whatever haircut we want. And the taper in the back can be as high or as aggressive as we want it, or we might do a little bit lower of a taper based on what your client wants or the neck shape. So just a quick little tip about the neck. If your client has a really short neck, they recommend a fairly high taper. If your client has a long neck, screw it, give them a taper anyways, because I love it. But the truth is, the book says, you know, if somebody has a longer neck, you shouldn't taper it, but who cares? One of my favorite guidelines to put in the back is the Rainbow Guideline, where basically I create the shape of a rainbow in the back. And what that does, like we talked about when we curve our guidelines, is when I fade this out, I'm actually preserving a lot of this edge so that when I'm done, I can edge both sides up perfect and I can get right down into it and I can make it look really, really nice without having to use enhancements in the back. Now, another way that we might taper it in the back is straight across. So if the client doesn't want to have these areas, which I don't know why they wouldn't, typically they don't care, you could kind of use your judgment back here. But if you want, you can take this taper up fairly high, maybe all the way to the occipital bone, and just blow out all that hair, and that can look really nice too for certain clients. Now, the taper really doesn't get too confusing until we get to the sideburns. This is kind of where things can go, things can go south here in the sideburns. So it doesn't always mean that you're going to do this in the sideburns if your client requests a taper. You just got to make sure that you're clear with them in the consultation. So this is basically the way that I like to put in my line, all right? I also like to put in my rainbow line for my taper. So basically it'll look something like this. And all this hair below, gone. So now I've actually preserved some of my edge, I've actually preserved some of my hairline, and when I go to fading this out, it's going to look super, super nice. And that's going to help me to preserve my edge, that's going to allow me to have that fade, and that's going to give that client that additional time so he doesn't have those like Elvis style mutton chops that came in. However, there are a couple other variations you can use. Some clients don't want all that hair left over and they like a really high taper. So in that case, you could just get rid of all that hair and you could just blend this entire thing out. And that would be like a higher taper. So again, just like anything, it's artistic, it's cool. You guys can do it however you want or however you feel like your client wants, and that's gonna give you the best chance for success. So just make sure you perform a good consultation and you can decide exactly what to do with the taper.
Oh, and before I go, if you guys didn't notice, I actually used a lot of S-Craft Blends photos because they're just so good, and I just want to shout him out. So check out my boy S-Craft Blends right here. Go and follow his YouTube channel. You can also follow him on Instagram. He's one of the dopest barbers in the industry, man, and I look up to him for real. So just check this man out. I figured I'd include him on this so that maybe, you know, you guys can go over there and subscribe to his channel as well.
If you got some value out of this video, smash that like button and let me know if you liked the vid in the comment. Write the word fire if you really liked it and you think I did a good job. And now that you have your client lined up good and proper, that's only half the battle. So we gotta learn how to get these lines out. So I'm gonna head over to the next phase. I encourage you guys to check out one of my playlists or follow me along to phase 2, and we'll see you guys in the next video. This is the YouTube Barber Academy. I'm Mr. Eddie Barber and I'm out of here, man. Peace. Make sure you check out my community tab because I'm posting polls and I'm always trying to gauge what you guys are looking to watch, and I'm trying to make my content based around that for exactly what you want. This is an area where a lot of people have growth pipe. There's a little bone that protrudes. I'm going to address all the many questions I've heard over the years, and first and most common reference points.
Did I mention that filming at home is just really challenging because there's always noise going on, there's always kids running around, there's always people coming to the door. I can't tell you how many extra takes I gotta do, even when I finally say it right.